welcome to Bryant and Baden. You'll notice I am sitting here next to my husband, Dr. Michael Baden, and also our friend, I should say Michael's friend, I've just co-opted him, the fabulous prosecutor, great prosecutor, David Roger, Las Vegas, Nevada. He was the man who finally got OJ, and I think, if I recall, the jury verdict came in on the dates that Nicole Simpson and Ron Goldman were killed, the Las Vegas case. David Roger, welcome to our show. I'm so excited to have you, and I have to ask you, OJ didn't have to do 9 years, did he? You offered him a deal.
Yeah, this was never about retribution or scoring one or evening the score for California. This was about a Las Vegas robbery. We approached his attorney at the time prior to the preliminary hearing and asked him if he had any interest in negotiating, and he said that unless we were willing to offer probation, he wasn't interested. And I explained to him that this was an armed robbery. We don't give people probation for committing armed robberies in Nevada.
What was the maximum he could have done under the deal? Was it less than what he got at the trial?
We never got that far. During the trial, we were back in the judge's chambers, and as attorneys, as they're positioning themselves and posturing with the judge, and the attorney said, we never got an offer. And I said, that's not true. I said, let's step out and talk. And so we talked to the attorney, and I said, listen, if he's willing to plead guilty and go straight to prison, we can negotiate a sentence. And we came to 28 months as the minimum sentence. And I forget what the maximum sentence would be. But he said, I'll talk to you tomorrow. Came back, didn't say anything. And I grabbed him in the hallway. I said, what OJ say? And he says, OJ says that unless you're willing to offer 12 months, he's not interested. And so, the rest is history.
Wow, unbelievable. And of course, your friend Michael was involved with OJ beforehand. That I know people did want retribution for you, but I know that he would never do that. That's such a fair deal. I can't believe it. Michael Bryant.
It's a bargain. I do, before I get to Dr. Baden, I remember, David, the verdict came in at 11 o'clock local time, 2 a.m. East Coast time. So it was a long night for everybody. That jury was working hard. Michael, it doesn't surprise me that you had some connection to Mr. Simpson and some of the backstory about his nefarious life. Give me your take.
Well, my take is that the criminal jury found him not guilty, which really doesn't sound as strong as it. Not guilty doesn't mean didn't do it. What it does mean is that the prosecution didn't prove it sufficiently. And I think one of the reasons for that was that Johnny Cochran was just an amazing defense attorney and who charmed the jury. And I think one of the things it seems to me as just a witness and not a lawyer is that probably the most important thing in becoming a lawyer isn't law school. It's how to teach you how to be a lawyer. It's how to pick a jury. I don't know if David would agree with that, but I think from what I've seen that it's hard to know what a juror is thinking during a trial, and the only chance the lawyers have is to get a fair jury is not really taught in law school.
Yeah, you got to be part mental health professional and part soothsayer. It is critical.
So, David, on that, were you worried at all about OJ's likability?
As a prosecutor and as the elected district attorney, I wasn't out there fishing for celebrity cases. Whenever a celebrity is a criminal defendant, in my opinion, the jury holds you to a higher burden because they believe that they know the defendant, they want to like the defendant, and so he didn't testify, but we were certainly concerned. We had never used a jury selection expert. But there was a guy in California, I think, was involved in his O.J. Simpson's first case and he reached out to us, and we used him as an expert. It was an interesting process, but yeah, you always have to be concerned about a defendant's charisma. During this case, much like California, Dr. Baden will tell you, it was a three-ring circus. We didn't talk to the media during the trial because we were focused on the case, but there were people lined up outside of the courthouse waiting for OJ to show up every day. He got an escort up to the courtroom. They were waiting for him when he returned at the end of the day. During recesses, he was taking photographs and signing autographs with people in the hallway. And so, as a prosecutor, you always have to be concerned about those intangibles.
Can I ask, David, you a quick question?
Yes, sir.
Because I was one of those hanging out, to spend a little time with him. And I ultimately interviewed him, but I did it in a way, and this was 3 days before you got your verdict, by the way. Interviewed him at the church that he went to on a Sunday. But I totally stayed away from anything related to the case. My goal was not to be held in contempt or somehow mess up your case. But I understand, that's an issue you had to deal with from day one throughout the whole process. How did you handle that?
I won a case with Dr. Baden as my key witness, and so this wasn't our first rodeo. As a young prosecutor, I watched the O.J. Simpson case in California. I read every book, both prosecution and defense, and I wanted to learn from those mistakes. And one of the mistakes I think prosecutors make around the country is that they become enamored with being on TV, and they're giving interviews to the media during the trial. And in every one of my cases, we made a commitment not to talk to the media, not because we don't like them. I had a very good relationship with the media, but you have to stay focused on the case. And so, when this case came through the door, I thought back to, Dr. Baden's case, and I thought about all the mistakes that people made. The detectives wanted to approve the case 2 days after the robbery. They met me down at the bottom of the courthouse and said, we're here to get your decision on this case, and we're told not to leave. And I said, well, if that's the case, it's denied. I said, we're not going to rush to judgment. They hadn't done any investigation. They had not identified the accomplices. They had not executed a single search warrant. They hadn't recovered any of the memorabilia. They had not recovered the weapons. And to use a cop term, they were a little rear end hurt. But I told them that, when your cause is righteous, good things happen. I worked with them on the investigation, and within 2 days, one of the accomplices' girlfriends called. She was upset with them, and she said, he will roll over like a hot cake. He is on his way back to LA. He's on Southwest Flight 315 from Las Vegas to Burbank. We yanked him off the airplane. He rolled immediately. He gave us the name of the accomplices. We executed search warrants that evening. We recovered the clothes, recovered the guns, and started identifying the suspects. And then, of course, as all suspects, or some suspects who are smart, they went and got attorneys. They came in and offered their cooperation. And of course, from there, we heard that the person who set up the deal had recorded everything. So we got those recordings. We got recordings of planning the robbery. We got recordings of the actual robbery. And we got recordings of one of the accomplices came in and gave us another recording of them talking about the robbery afterwards at the Palms Hotel at the Little Buddha, and where they're talking about we can't admit that we had guns. And so, and of course, we rolled every one except one of the accomplices. And so we had a very, very strong case. So it proves that good trial lawyers have to stay focused.
You're so right, because I have this discussion all the time with people, and I say, I see all these defense attorneys out giving interviews in the middle of trial, giving interviews, and you have to do some interviews, you have to handle the press. But I think that they want to be their own celebrity. in a high profile case, as opposed to being the attorney. And if you do good work, you become known. But I have cases right now, of somebody very famous. No one even knows I'm handling it, and I'm not going to tell anybody, because it's none of anyone's business. You do a good job, you get a good result, and you go to sleep at night.
You're right, Linda, and it is amazing that prosecutors lose cases and they make money off of them. I recall a case that you were involved in the defense. It was a very high-profile case. The prosecutor wrote a book during the trial, and it was published right after the acquittal. And not only did he make money, but he also ran against his boss, and I think he won the election. And so, but you're right. Good trial lawyers stay focused, keep their eye on the ball, and don't talk to the media until after the case is completed.
Speaking about media, Michael, you were at OJ's house on your case, taking pictures and samples and all. I think when they ran away in the white Bronco, in the chase, and weren't you on Larry King that night? I wasn't with you then. I knew you, but I wasn't with you.
Which Michael are you talking to?
I'm talking to this one.
No,
I don't remember being at OJ's. Oh, that Michael. Okay.
It was interesting because Bob Shapiro was hired as the lawyer for OJ when it became apparent that he was going to get charged. The police were looking to charge him. And he called near midnight and got a hold of me and Henry Lee, a criminalist specialist, trace evidence specialist, asked us to fly out there right there. He wanted us to get to the scene and to examine OJ before he was charged. And that was the time got into Los Angeles, driven immediately to his other attorney, Kardashian's house, where to see OJ, who was being sheltered there. The police didn't know where he was. They hadn't a warrant yet. And went in there with 3 girls there with a housekeeper. Little did I believe what would happen to the 3 Kardashian girls. And went upstairs, and there was OJ, and it was just the immediate impression is how depressed he was. And my first thought was, when he gets taken into custody, he has to have suicide prevention techniques because that he was liable to commit suicide. And Henry and I examined him. He had some injuries on him that documented, and there was an issue of how they happened, and took trace evidence. And while doing that, got a call from the district attorney that the police were just notified the police to take him into custody. Where are you? Because he didn't know. He knew the attorney, the Bob Shapiro's number, but didn't know where OJ was. And Bob Shapiro immediately told him that where he was in the Kardashian house. We finished what we were doing, and we're waiting for the police to come. And I remember it took. He was in the Beverly Hills someplace, and it took a longer time than I would have expected. I thought they'd dash right over. They didn't really dash right over. And Henry and I were comparing notes on what we'd found on OJ. And suddenly the police arrived, and they came up there and said they couldn't find OJ. He had just disappeared. And initially the police thought that Henry and I were involved in the disappearance. So they kept us for a couple hours while checking it out until one of the police officers recognized Henry Lee as being head of the crime lab in Connecticut, and let Henry go. And then a little bit later, they let me go. And then Larry King immediately called me. And that's when I viewed the Bronco chase with him, which apparently, reading today's newspapers, actually, 93 million people watched. Just the most amazing thing. And my concern was, I expressed then, was that when he comes into custody, he's got to be put on suicide watch. And they did when they put him into. But I was afraid that he had a gun in the car apparently, and afraid that he would have used the gun on himself.
Well, that didn't happen. But David, you are wonderful. Your wife is a wonderful judge. I should point that out. Elected a number of times. You'll never find fault with any of her opinions or anything. And I always am concerned. Obviously, it's Las Vegas. I'm concerned for everybody's safety. When I come to do the World Series of Poker this year, I'm hoping to bring Michael with me, and maybe we can get to have dinner again or connect.
Absolutely. I miss both of you a lot.
Really, it was a formative piece of my forensic development to meet you and the other David.
I'm not sure about that, but Dr. Baden really won a very high-profile case for us here in Las Vegas. We were going down a completely wrong path. And a quick story about Dr. Baden. Our case was circling the drain, and I said, "Listen, bring Dr. Baden out, stat." And so he came out, and we met him after court one day, and he says, "David," he says, "you got the wrong cause of death. It didn't happen the way you think it did." And I thought that I was going to be the next autopsy. The blood drained from me. And Dr. Baden recognized it, and he said, "Listen, if you don't like what I have to say, I'll get on the next plane back to New York, and you'll never hear from me again." And he explained his findings, and I looked at my partner. I said, "I think he's got it." And he did. And the jury convicted 2 people of murder in the first degree based upon his testimony. Dr. Baden is not only a phenomenal forensic pathologist, but he's a phenomenal expert. He knows how to relate to a jury. He had these jurors eating out of his hand. But during a recess out in the hallway, and there was a lot of media attention. I mean, this case, Court TV said that their ratings were the highest since the O.J. Simpson case. Locally, they covered it gavel to gavel. They beat out Oprah Winfrey's ratings every afternoon. But there's a lot of media, obviously, in the courthouse, and this lady collapses. And who's right next to her? Dr. Baden. And he is down on his knees comforting her. And the cameras are there. And I'm going, you can't stage something like this. I said, "Dr. Baden, did you trip her?" He goes, No, I didn't have anything to do with it. But it was just so wonderful. And I owe my career to Dr. Baden for sure.
Thank you, David.
I doubt that.
You're very kind.
I got to ask Can I ask a dumb question? What trial was that?
This was the defendants were Rick Tabish and Sandra Murphy. They were charged with killing a casino mogul by the name of Ted Binion, and they killed him to make it look like a heroin overdose.
The name Binion, that makes sense. I remember that whole story now.
Yeah, and we went down the path that this was a heroin overdose because he had heroin in his stomach. And Dr. Baden came in and saw the tissue samples and looked at the photographs, and there were things that just didn't add up. For example, Ted Binion had abrasions around his mouth. And I asked our medical examiner, what is that? He says, "Oh, it's from shaving." I said, "Yeah, but he had stubble. He didn't shave." And then he had his nose was bent, and he had abrasions around his mouth. He had an abrasion on his wrist that was jagged. And I asked the medical examiner, "What is that?" And he says, "Oh, it's from a wristband." And I said, "He didn't wear a watch. There was no watch." And then he had a mark on his chest, and it looked like a half moon with little dots. And I asked the medical examiner, "What is that?" And he says, "Oh, well, it is a bug bite." I said, "There were no bugs around the body." And so Dr. Baden comes in, he reviews all of this, and he says, "David, as I said, he didn't die of a heroin overdose. I said, what the hell happened? And he says, he was burked. I said, where's Burke? And he talks about Burke and Hare. There's two doctors in the 1800s who needed cadavers for their medical school. And so they would go get old ladies liquored up, and then they'd suffocate them where there weren't any marks on the body, and they'd use them as cadavers. And so I said, so how did that happen to Ted Binion? And he says, well, look, the marks on the wrist, that's a restraint. That's not a wristband. He says, there are petechial hemorrhages in the guy's eyes. That's what happens to blood vessels when a person lacks oxygen. He says the abrasion around the mouth is some type of covering so he can't breathe. I said, all right. I said, what about that mark on his chest? He says, that is a button mark. And I looked at my shirt and I looked at the button and I'm going, oh my God, I think he's got it. And he says they sat on him so that he couldn't breathe. And the cause of death wasn't the heroin overdose, it's asphyxiation. And, the case unfolded from there. And all the physical evidence corroborated Dr. Baden. This guy, they called off the maid, and the maid showed up every day at this house. They had closed these huge drapes in the living room that had floor-to-ceiling windows. Those drapes had never been closed. But the gardener was there that day, and so they had to close the drapes so nobody could see in that. It was a phenomenal case, but had we continued going down that path without Dr. Baden, it would have been a big fat goose egg.
Yeah, it's a great story.
It is a great story.
Thank you, David.
So that's why you have to meet David in person, Michael, because he really is all. As you see, he's a great prosecutor. He follows the evidence, he follows the truth, and he does it right. Something that we're hoping to see in every case. Sometimes we do, sometimes we don't. They were defense attorneys. David, thank you so much.